And we are live, ladies and gentlemen, with the very first episode of Tempo Shift, a new Overwatch podcast dedicated to most of the competitive scene, Overwatch League contenders. We'll also be bringing on a lot of interesting guests, and it doesn't get much more interesting than the guest that we have today, who is clearly very gracious with his time to choose to be on this podcast and certainly deserves a great introduction. He is one of the first true content creators in the Overwatch scene who became known for his insightful reviews and discussion centered videos. He was also one of the hosts of the popular Around the Watch, which was one of the earliest Overwatch pods to ever grace our scene. This early involvement didn't go unnoticed as he was scooped up as an analyst for the San Francisco Shock. Since parting ways with the Shock, he has found tremendous success as coach and director of operations with none other than the great Vancouver Titans. During his current stint, he has helped his team to an undefeated regular season record, by far the best map differential in the league, a record-setting win streak, 2 stage finals appearances, and 1 stage title. If that resume hasn't impressed you yet, he is also a renowned on-the-scene reporter. And if you haven't seen his coverage of the Tip of the Hats event, boy, have you missed out on greatness. Welcome to the show, Harsha.
I was a little bit too gracious, I think, but thank you for saying those things, and nice to be here.
Well, thanks for being here, and a great guest deserves a great introduction. So, I think obviously we have to tackle a lot of the news that went live this week with Toronto, with all the academy teams, but I kind of want to start with the Titans, and because obviously you guys are at the top of the league, you guys are where every other team wants to be, so there's certainly a lot of value in kind of digging a little bit on what's going on behind the scenes, and so let's just start about what's going on right now, because we are obviously in a mid-season break. I know some teams are coming back to practice as soon as this week, and others are giving their guys a little more time off. Where are you guys right now? What are you doing personally? Where are the guys at? What's the plan during this mid-season break?
So one of the things that I didn't realize last year when I was on Shock, just because we were generally either low tier or middle of the pack, like we had one winning stage, but we never made stage playoffs, is that when you're a winning team, you actually have no time at all. So we've given the players a lot of free time in that sense over this break. They won't be coming back till like late next week, and we'll actually be doing like a Vancouver trip beforehand. But yeah, otherwise we're all just relaxing. They're all in Korea, and I'm at home.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that's, I guess, the luxury of having such a strong start and kind of giving yourselves a cushion, being undefeated in the regular season, kind of already securing stage playoffs. So, the guys certainly deserve that. And, speaking about sort of this season, heading into the year, you were all obviously one of the expansion teams, but I think, there are obviously 8 expansion teams. You could say even 10 if you consider the fact that Shanghai and Florida blew everything up and built from scratch. But what I think a lot of the teams didn't have that you guys have is that you guys are bringing in a core that's been together for so long, and it feels like you guys have that familiarity and that trust from the get-go, and when I was watching the stage 1 finals in map 7, Shock finishes the map with a minute to go, and you guys flip the switch and come back and finish with like a record-setting time. And when I saw that, I'm like, okay, these guys are mentally unbreakable. So, do you think that the familiarity and the trust that the guys brought over from Korean contenders is really what's giving you this kind of a hot start, or what do you think it is?
Yeah, I think that the bond that a lot of the guys on the team have is pretty much it's like irreplaceable. It's something that I guess it's taken for granted, but I think that you notice that teams that are together for a really long time, especially when the whole team has been together for a really long time, they just kind of have a different type of trust. And I think that the other thing is that Runaway felt like kind of like a different type of team than a lot of the other contenders teams, where it was one that had both a lot of fanfare, but also it was together for like a really long time, and they had a very strong culture. So I guess you need the right type of team, and you kind of need to bring everybody together if you want that kind of atmosphere, I think.
Yeah. I mean, like looking from the outside looking in, everyone kind of tries to boast that they have a family culture and all that stuff. But
Yeah.
even when the Runaway guys were in Korea, it felt like they were a family the way they acted with Flowerwin and with Runner running the show. Did you guys sort of feel the same way?
Yeah, absolutely. I think I said in a bunch of like preseason interviews that every team, like you said, every team does say that they feel like a family, but
Mhm.
it's kind of like when you join this team, you realize they're all kind of just saying that, but this team actually really feels like a family.
So what kind of, because obviously you came in sort of as an outsider to the group. How do you feel like you were welcomed into the group, and what kind of things sort of gave you that sense of family feeling where you were like, wow, okay, this is completely different from what I was part of before. This is a special group right here.
So when I got brought in, they actually didn't know me too well. I think like some of them had just seen my stuff online, but otherwise they just knew that I worked in Overwatch League before and I was just coming to help out this year. Um, but like after just talking to them for a day or two, they were like really friendly. They were really accepting, I guess. And so I don't know. They I guess when we all hung out in Vancouver when we were doing the announcement party, and they were I think always willing to like kind of educate me on like Korean stuff, take me out and stuff like that. So I guess like in terms of examples of how they're like family, it's kind of hard to say, but it's just like the team house environment. It kind of feels like everybody knows exactly what everybody else is doing, and they're always like they're never alone. They're always together in somebody's bedroom, all just hanging out and talking or stuff like that. So it's like they just prefer to spend time together. I think is a big thing.
Mm. That's an interesting thing as well, because there's always been a lot of debate about should teams live in team houses or do you have a facility and private time with apartments. Obviously, with Florida, we dabbled with both. I've heard teams who are like, we definitely think we need apartments, but ever since they moved to apartments, they're like, yeah, maybe we should have a team house just because the discipline kind of like everyone slacks a little bit when they kind of have to take care of themselves and things like that. What do you, because you guys, I think with Shock, you guys lived in apartments as far as I remember. I think you mentioned you lived with Choi, an architect, and now you guys are all in a team house. Obviously, a pretty giant and ridiculously nice house from what I saw in the video. But what do you think in that debate in terms of what's better, apartments or a house for a team?
I think 100%. Like, there's no question in my mind that houses are better for
Mm.
teams, and I think that even on Shock we felt that way. But there are just a lot of constraints in season one. But you'll notice that like they actually moved into team houses this year as well. I think this is one of the patterns that I noticed that I didn't really tell people about, but it was just kind of in the back of my mind always. Is that most of the teams that made playoffs last year were in houses, and most of the ones that didn't were not in houses. And then I also noticed that like this year, kind of a very similar trend is emerging. And I don't think it's obvious. I don't think performance is just based on being in a team house, but I think that you're way more trusting of your teammates. You're way more how do you say it? Like you're just spending so much more time together with your
Yeah.
teammates when you're in a team house that it's just um, I guess an irreplaceable environment. And I think that there are obviously things that you'll have better in apartments, right? You'll have a lot more privacy. You'll probably be a lot less irritable because you don't have your teammates, constantly using the bathroom while you're waiting or something like that. But you're just not going to be as close to your teammates, I think. And so I think just having a house is, I feel like it's really important for at least esports or at least Overwatch League.
Yeah, it's interesting because it's sort of how I feel as well. Because we started off last season in a house, and then everyone was like, "We need privacy, we need apartments," and we got apartments towards the end of the year. And like, I do admit it was nicer to have my own space and for all the players to have their own space. Everyone kind of liked that, but it did feel like we kind of grew apart a little more as a team. You know, you didn't have these, like, naturally you would just end up in a living room when you're in a house and just hang out and do things together. So yeah, I feel like I'm sort of getting back in the gaming house train, at least for the players. I think it's very good to build camaraderie with each other in that regard.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The other thing I'd add is that I think that being in apartments, you're generally like 2 to 3 in each apartment or whatever it is. You don't normally have like single apartments, right? So I feel like it tends to promote like being clicky rather than bonding together as a whole team. So yeah, I agree. Just what you were saying as well.
Yeah.
Being team house is just a really good environment
Yeah.
for.
Yeah, it's interesting how that develops, because I know that a lot of other teams are sort of, they have the same mindset now too. So it'll be interesting to see how everyone tackles it moving forward into season two. But something I'm also interested about is in terms of expectations, because you guys head into the season, you do have a core that has been very successful, that has a history of winning. And I remember listening to one of the podcasts, sort of the preseason power ranking podcasts, and very humbly you claimed that, well, probably a fair placement for the Titans right now would be like fourth to eighth. So what I'm wondering is, were you sandbagging your predictions before the season started, or were you just being humble, or did you not expect to like get off to the start where you're like undefeated, you're like you know rolling through the league essentially?
So a lot of people have actually asked me about that specific comment that I
Yeah.
made. And I think when I was saying it, what I meant was that I think that analysts and pundits and all should probably, if they're being, let's say, fair, I think put us in that 4 to 8 range, because I felt like, just based on resumes alone, Korean Contenders is like a different environment from Overwatch League. But after our whole team moved to America, I think it became clear to us that we were going to be one of the best teams in the league. Um, and after we moved to America, it did really feel like in stage one, at the very beginning, that like Shock and New York were the teams that could compete with us, but the rest of the it felt like the rest of the table couldn't really keep up. If I'm being honest.
So being in, because obviously with Shock, you guys went through a lot of struggles early on, so you did get a feel for how it is sort of towards the bottom of the table, and now you're in an environment where you're just winning everything. Especially during stage one, do you guys feel like you had to battle a little bit of complacency?
I feel like we did in stage two, to be honest. In stage one, we had those scary matches against like Guangzhou and Chengdu. Um, and those weren't necessarily complacency, but I feel like maybe inadequate preparation from our side, from the coaching side. So I think that in like those kind of scares helped us stay on track, and we played really well throughout the stage. In stage two, I guess it kind of went unnoticed because Shock did so incredibly well with their golden stage. We actually only dropped 3 maps through the whole stage as well, so we had a really good stage two. But I felt like we had such a huge winning streak that we never, we didn't remember how it felt to lose, and I feel like we got a little bit complacent. Um, the intensity turned up for playoffs, but I feel like you kind of have to continually have that hunger throughout the entire stage. And Shock did, and we didn't, so we ended up faltering in the biggest match. But um, I also feel like losing that match was kind of important as well. It just reminds us that we can't really be too complacent. And stage three, you're going to see us stronger again.
Yeah, so obviously you guys even though you guys did have, it did go sort of unnoticed that you guys had an exceptional stage as well, but as you guys start stage two, as it progresses towards the end of stage two, you do see Shock, a team that gave you a really close fight. Even though I felt like in the stage one finals, you guys were the better team. It felt like you guys were winning the maps you were winning more convincingly, and Shock kind of clutched out the maps that they won. So I did feel like you did have a little bit of a cushion, but then you see them come out and being super hungry, winning every single map, which to me, it's like that's a sign of exceptional discipline. They saw how close they were. They came in with a mindset where like, we're not losing again, and they just sweep the floor. And to me, it's just incredible because control maps essentially, like, they have
Yeah.
so much variance, and to not drop a single one and win out everything else during a stage is just such an impressive accomplishment. So sort of heading into the playoffs, you guys obviously saw Shock doing these things. Were you guys impressed? Were you guys worried? What were your feelings both like before the playoffs and also heading into the final match?
We definitely felt like a rematch was inevitable. Like they looked like clearly the best team out of the rest of the standings, I guess. And I don't know, we definitely like in terms of what were we feeling about a rematch with them, we definitely were ready, but we also knew they were going to be a bit stronger than they were in the last stage, and clearly they were. They won 4-2. Um, but I feel like I'm struggling to kind of like describe exactly the feeling. Like we knew that they're going to be a really strong team, but I feel like there's no team in the league that we can't beat if we're playing at our peak potential, right? And I think that unfortunately we didn't come out and play the best that we could that day, and maybe we didn't prepare the best we could or whatever. But like it's something where they're definitely and they have a claim to the best team in the league right now. But I feel like going into the rest of the season, we'll definitely be fine. We know how scary they can be, basically, and we know that it is possible to lose. So uh, that's just something we'll keep in the back of the mind of our mind and prepare more.
Hmm. Yeah, and I mean, obviously you were in shock. How do you feel about their season? How they kind of bounced back? Because I remember also reading that you talked with Sinatra upon your departure, and were like, "You guys are going to be insane this season." I really believe that. So you obviously saw this coming. Probably a lot of other people did as well because of how how much talent is assembled on that roster. They already had such a talented roster that finished stage four kind of strong, and then you bring in Strike, you're bringing in Violet, you're getting all these reinforcements. But how do you feel about the shock, like from the outside looking in? Obviously, having worked with them as well.
From the outside looking in, oh, I guess so. What I said to Sinatra, basically when I was leaving, I said all of that knowing kind of, well, we'd all scouted the team together, put together like the acquisitions that they needed to make for season two together. Like I kind of just knew the direction that the team was heading, and I knew that obviously Krusty, Junkbuck, Nike, all really good coaches, and it seemed like they were just adding more structure to the system. So there were like a lot of changes being made to Shock over the offseason. I feel like, and there are people reporting rumors that players weren't happy or whatever. Um, so I just remember like saying that to Sinatra because I knew that what the plans were, and I knew that they were going to be really good. So to me, not very unexpected. Obviously, they struggled a little bit in stage one. Like they started out 4-3, actually started out the first three matches 1-2. Um, but like their plan was so good, and like the pieces that they put together are really like good players, right?
Mm.
So I don't know. This was kind of just what I expected as well.
Mm. So something I'm interested about as well, because a lot of people have discussed it too, is kind of the play style of the Titans and your identity as a team. Because even the Dallas coaches, I think, said in some interviews where they were like, playing against these guys is so suffocating because they're committing ults in situations when they're down. They're grinding these fights out. They're winning fights that they're not supposed to win. And when I'm rewatching these games, like even the fights where it feels like you guys shouldn't win and you commit, even if you lose those fights, you lose them in a way where you kind of milk the time and you don't cripple yourself for the rest of the map. And it feels like it is a risky playstyle. It is something that you guys can get away with because you have such an immense amount of talent. You have a ton of trust. So I feel like if someone makes a call, you guys, like, no one doubts for a moment this is what we're committing to, and you see that decisiveness, right? So my question is, like, when you finally meet your match, I think is Shock, because I think the Shock is sort of the only team in the league that kind of matches you position for position in terms of their strengths, and they don't let themselves get run over like that. Do you feel like your playstyle kind of gives you a bit of a disadvantage when they finally kind of figured it out?
I'm not sure if it's a disadvantage, but definitely I'd say that the only team that really where that playstyle hurt us was definitely that Shock match. I feel like it wasn't just that we were, our team is very aggressive. Like they all trust each other a lot, and they know like the limits of their heroes. I don't feel like it was necessarily the playstyle that bit us. I feel like it was just kind of the team. There was just this like kind of desperate atmosphere, and
Mm-hmm.
they were making calls that they normally wouldn't make. I feel like, and um, I think it's just one of those things where we live and die by our style, and it's just that unfortunately we weren't able to control our mentalities well enough for that finals, and they were calm throughout. Shock fell down 2-1 and got full held, and still
Mm-hmm.
came out really strong for the rest of the series. So um, yeah, it's definitely exploitable, but I think that our playstyle wasn't necessarily the reason we lost. It was just that we didn't execute well enough.
Mm. Yeah, I mean, I sort of tend to agree because I think what makes you guys special is because everyone trusts each other and you put an immense amount of pressure on your opponents. And I feel like even if you would try to, as a coaching staff, scale that back a little bit, I think you kind of remove pieces that are essential to the Titans'
You might
identity.
do
And
more harm than good.
exactly, it feels like you're sort of putting a leash on your players and you're limiting their creative freedom when that is the strength. That is sort of the team color, like all the Koreans like to sort of reference to how a team works, like the strengths. So, I do see that. But do you feel so? You mentioned how you felt like you guys weren't able to keep your mentality up. Did you feel that in the sort of dugout when you were listening to the communication? How was it different? Was it completely different from anything you heard the rest of the season? Was it like a unique situation, or were there other games where you guys kind of fell into that type of a slump?
It's hard to say because I feel like we've definitely had that for like a map before, but this team is really mentally strong. I
Yeah.
think it was just that it just felt like a lot of factors piling up, and then all of a sudden, we're at the end of the match and it's 4-2. But like let's say in the series, for example, when we had just won Paris, Paris is actually our worst map at that stage, and we full held shock on it. So we were all really, I think, amped up. But I'm blanking on what the next map was. Uh, was it Gibraltar maybe?
I believe so. Yeah, I think
Yeah,
that's correct.
I think I think after that Gibraltar, we kind of wavered, and that's a lot of that is on us as the coaching stuff. Like we need to make sure that their mentalities are in check, and we're always talking to them between maps and stuff like that, right? So I, it's hard to say. Like it's not just one thing, but I feel like we just didn't do enough. Is probably the best answer.
Mm. So when you guys lost in that losing moment, when Shaw get up and they cheer, and then they show the camera goes to Bumper, and they show him with his head inside in his hands, like really devastated. And then fast forward 10 seconds, and he's up on his feet, sort of laughing while he's shaking hands. To me, I see that I'm like, oh, okay, these guys, he's over it already. He's ready to get on. You know, he's ready for round three, basically. Um, at least that's what you see from the outside looking in, but it's very difficult to gauge. How did the guys react? How did the guys sort of react in immediately after the game, and then sort of in the days that followed?
Um, I guess it was a little bit gloomy. Probably worse for the coaches, honestly, because um, I think Runaway, like the players from Runaway, have experience going, getting knocked out in quarters or whatever, and also winning the entire tournament, right? So I think that it was a little bit gloomy at first, but then everybody else, like everybody, kind of thought to themselves, okay, that's 1-1 now. Stage three finals, let's win that one. So I think everybody's able to put it past them, like learn from the loss and then move on.
Hmm. Yeah, I mean, I guess you mentioned that you battled a little bit of complacency heading into stage two. You think, the guy's gonna come back with a lot more fire? Did you expect Vancouver to just tear their league apart, sort of in the way that Shock came back after stage one?
Uh, not sure to be honest. That requires both an easy schedule and incredible discipline, right? Like you can't take away from actually either us or Shock. Both of us had pretty easy schedules in stage two, right? Next stage we played Gladiators twice. We play Atlanta, who upset New York twice actually. So, it's gonna be hard for sure, but the whole team's definitely gonna be very focused, and we have that Shock loss in the back of our mind, right? All the power rankings are gonna say, Titans number two, Shock number one, for at least until a team dethrones them, right? So we don't expect anybody to dethrone them until we play them, and so I think that everybody's kind of going to be focused on that for sure.
Hmm. So obviously, speaking about the coaching that you mentioned, something you've had. I mean, you've had sort of a unique pleasure in terms of working with two head coaches that are very highly regarded in Pajion and Krusty. Krusty obviously having an undefeated stage with Boston, coming to Shock, making Shock look very competitive in stage four, and now accomplishing all that he's accomplished with Shock. And Pajion obviously being undefeated in North America through contenders and Overwatch League until the stage two finals. And you have had the chance to kind of work side by side. What do you think? Like, how are they different? What have you learned from each of them? Do they have any similarities that this? Oh, now I know what makes a great coach. Both of these guys have this quality.
So in terms of, I guess, first, like what I learned from both of them, um, well, I guess I'll cover their similarities first. In that both are similar in that they're both like very intelligent about the game. Like they can kind of see scenarios and know how they'll always play out. And I guess yeah, just their game sense is like unrivaled. I feel like um, in terms of differences, they choose to kind of like uh, run their teams differently, but they both always focus on making sure that their players are learning like being smarter, can make decisions on their own. That was a huge focus with Krusty in Stage 4, and I know it still is, and it's a huge focus with Pajon as well. Like, uh, both really value making sure that their players like see scenarios, and then suddenly, like, if they see differentiations, can adapt to those, right? And that's been a strength of this team for all of Overwatch League, and that's been a strength of San Francisco's mostly recently with all of Stage 2, right? Um, in terms of differences, I'll say that like I feel like Krusty is a bit more hierarchical, whereas Pajon really likes to um, be more, how do you say it, like involve the players in things, and so those are like the main differences. But otherwise, I think there are a lot of similarities. Um, I guess what I learned from them both is just kind of, I I can take their kind of the differences in their styles and kind of make my own framework. Um, but right now I'm part of a system, so just trying to help Pajon execute his goal, and then uh, leaning on game knowledge and stuff like that to help him.
Hmm. I think that's very interesting that you say that both of them are really trying to get their players sort of collective game understanding up, because when you think about Overwatch, really you can prepare your team for a lot of different set pieces and scenarios, especially in first fights, but a lot of beyond that is kind of mid-fight reads, being able to identify swaps, identify situations where, well, we're not prepared for this, how do we adjust on the fly? And it seems like these two teams are doing the best, and it's clearly like you say, a priority for these head coaches. How do they go about like implementing that? Do they work a lot one-on-one with the players?
Um, so I'd say one of the biggest things is definitely like uh, review sessions, right? Both teams do a lot of reviewing as like a whole team, and you can kind of show them scenarios that happened in a scrim, like how they reacted, how you can ask them how they should have reacted when X moves to Y position on the map, stuff like that. So it's just a lot of like quizzing, reviewing, and I guess like not necessarily talking hypotheticals, but like using examples and just kind of showing them. That seems like a really simple answer, I feel like, but I maybe it's just the way that both Krusty and Pajon do it. But there's like something a little bit different from, I'd say, you know you get a little bit more out of reviews from them than I feel like you would from necessarily other head coaches in the league, right?
Hmm.
Um, but yeah, definitely focusing on making the players smarter is just like their both of their number one priorities, and I feel like that shows when you look at adaptations that these teams make.
Yeah, sort of allowing them to find solutions on their own, and then it's easier also to accept sort of criticism or things like that when you kind of
Yeah.
reach that conclusion yourself. So yeah, it definitely makes sense. Speaking about like coaching and review sessions, because obviously you are now the sole Western coach in a completely in an all Korean team and an all Korean environment, all Korean coaching staff. So it's a very unique situation. And obviously, I have a little bit of experience working in a majority Korean environment, and I mean, it is a little bit different because, like, what I found was very difficult was these review sessions, because when you're doing VOD reviews and you're catering to a majority Korean roster as a Western coach, but you also have to make sure the Western players get the hang of things. You kind of you have to walk through things. It has to go through a translator. It has to go back to the players. The players have their discussion. It goes back to the translator. Inevitably, something gets lost in translation. It comes back to me, and then it's like it just you're battling so many inefficiencies, and it's so time consuming that it's very difficult to learn, I think, in that type of environment. And fortunately for us, we didn't really have a Korean coach who could take care of those duties, and our roster wasn't, I guess, the English. You know, they weren't strong enough in their English language to the point where I could just speak and they would understand everything. But
Yeah.
obviously, for you, it's a little bit different because you do have very good Korean coaches in Pajeon, Yangwon, and Andante who can handle all of that. So I suppose you get a little more room to kind of morph your role and play to your strengths. So I'm
Yeah.
curious about like how has your role how did your role start off? How did it evolve over time with this team? How what do you sort of tend to contribute with now? Because obviously you also have two titles. That's very interesting. You're a coach and also director of operations. So I'm very curious about how all of that works for you, and kind of even though you're kind of lonely there with all the Koreans.
Well, I think sort of. when you have like I guess part of my role when I came to this team, right, is that these guys didn't have Overwatch League experience, even though they're in like an incredibly competitive environment. They're moving to like a new country and stuff like that. So part of my role is just obviously make sure that they're like comfortable in this area. Um, and like you're saying before, I'm the sole Westerner, right? So I'm not in VOD review. What I'm generally doing is just talking to the coaching staff and making sure, like, giving them my ideas. But then, it's more efficient if it comes from Pagion or Young One in VOD reviews, just because they speak the language, they can understand what the players are saying, stuff like that, right? So I've taken more of like a backseat role in VOD review, I would say, and I've picked up a few more like managerial duties just to kind of help out, make sure that like the players' mentalities are good, keep them happy and stuff like that. Um, but I think that's just kind of natural for somebody that's not necessarily, um, I guess, for lack of a better word, one of them. Like I, just because I'm from this area, I can kind of help out more with, how do you say it, like managerial stuff, like making sure their mentalities are good. I don't really have a necessarily a coherent answer. Just
Mm-hmm.
it's more vague, because it's hard to kind of describe duties, but
Yeah.
yeah, that's just mainly what I would say.
Hmm. So switching gears a little bit, and we talked a little bit about Shock, and you having high expectations for them. Obviously, heading into the season, everyone kind of puts their power rankings on the board, and you have different expectations for different teams. Were there any teams this season that have surprised you, either by how good they performed better than you expected, or worse than you expected? Who's sort of been the most interesting to you in terms of that regard?
I'll talk about one team that actually didn't surprise me, but it surprised me what everybody was saying about them is that people were saying that Spark's probably going to be the best expansion team, the best team in the league, stuff like that. We definitely never felt that way when we were playing them. Even in Korea, when our players were all in their own houses, and we're playing in pretty bad condition, scrimming before the season started. Like Spark felt like the one team that we wouldn't really have any problems with. And then when we came to America, everybody was talking about how much they improved here and stuff like that. And then finally, like we were like, oh wow, I wonder what happened to this team. And then we played them, and it just felt like they were worse in America than they were in Korea. So I think that team surprised me in terms of I didn't understand why everybody had such lofty expectations of them, like putting them in the top three of the league and stuff like that. Whereas, um, who else? I guess Shock's stage one surprised me in that I didn't think they'd start 1-2. I didn't think they'd lose three matches, but they're obviously where they need to be now. Otherwise, I think things are playing out pretty much as I expected. Um, Maybe Toronto stage one surprised me because I think they overperformed and did really well with the pieces they have. Unfortunately, kind of fell back down to earth in stage two when they lost Stellar, but
Mm.
they made pickups, I guess, and maybe we'll talk about that.
Yeah,
But
we'll definitely touch on that. But like staying a little bit on the Spark, because I think that's an interesting discussion because they did come out, they did look a little discombobulated, but they have kind of picked it up towards the end of stage two. They look pretty strong, and to me, like they do feel like a top six, top seven at the worst team in the league right now, um, which is pretty much a pretty good climb considering where they were in stage one. What do you feel about the Spark now? If we don't look just at stage one, but kind of their first half of the season as a whole.
so it definitely looks like they've improved a bit and they've found like a structure that or like a system that works for them. But it feels like right now it's really, and I guess this is maybe a symptom of the meta being the same for so long. It feels like there's such a big gap between, let's say, Shock Us and New York, and like the next tier team.
Mm.
And unfortunately, like the next team up, probably Gladiators, right? And then it feels like there's a gap between Gladiators and the teams beneath them, right? So it's hard to accurately gauge. I feel like the middle of the pack just because it's so like RNG, right? Seoul could have beaten Spark and could have been in playoffs, and Spark would have been 3-4 again.
Yeah.
Um, Spark did a really good job beating London, but I also feel like London's one of those teams where they can either be one of the best teams in the world or they can just not perform at all. So it's just really hard for me to make a framework of the middle of the pack. I do definitely agree that if you look at Sparks' recent performance, they have to be kind of in that top 7 range. But it just feels like if you're like rolling dice with teams in that area.
Yeah, I mean, you don't even have that big of a sample size in reality. It's only
Yeah,
14 games. But yeah, I do feel like Spark, to me, they've sort of had three stages to their season. They had the stage where they were just kind of playing all their Korean players. Then they tried to incorporate Gushui, and I think that was a very trialing period for them because you could tell that there were communication issues. You have five Korean players and a Chinese main tank, and you could especially see the difference in their Ryan 3-3 when they were playing Ryan 3-3 mirrors. Like they were so uncoordinated. The way they used bubbles was clear. Like, you could see the time was completely off. They were using them while the shield was up, so they were not kind of tempo shifting. Reference to the name of the podcast here. They were not tempo shifting as a team at all, and I felt like that was their biggest weakness, and it looked really iffy. But even then, their Winston 3-3 comms looked really, really strong. Even in the game against you guys, I think they went to the map 4 and they played. You guys played Winston goats against each other, and I felt like they performed almost as well as you guys did, and it was a very, very even matchup. So I was very impressed with that. I'm like, if they can fix those communication issues, maybe they can really sort of unlock their potential. And I think that's really kind of what has happened. Obviously, they bring in Crystal a little bit. I'm not sure what language they're speaking, but uh, even the Reinhardt 3-3 mirror looks a lot better. Even against London, they looked really, really clean in their trades. Gushia was, I think, outplaying Gesture in a lot of situations, but that's obviously together with his team, like the distant management, all that stuff was there. So I think that's sort of been an impressive rise by the Spark. But yeah, I mean, I agree. Like it's kind of it's difficult to gauge these middle of the pack teams because you look at all of these statistical graphs that get posted on competitive Overwatch that kind of trying to reference of how good
yeah,
teams are, and it's like Shock and Vancouver, and then New York is a little bit behind, and then everyone else is like way
yeah.
everyone's
One
like in a
above.
club. Yeah, exactly. So it is very, very difficult to gauge. But out of those teams that are in the middle that have established themselves as a middle as a tier 2 team, I guess, but behind you guys, um, it does feel to me like, coming back to the point that I made before, like familiarity seems to be the key because you guys have familiarity coming into the year. New York obviously have it, Shock have it, and then the teams that are below you, like Glad's obviously made a couple of changes. They lost Fisher, but they reloaded with the same core essentially. Dallas brought in some players, but they also have the same core. All of these teams kind of stuck together, and it feels like familiarity and like trust is super important. And trust you only build up over time, I think.
Yeah,
Yeah.
100%.
Um, so I think this is a good time to touch on Toronto that we mentioned before because that was the big bombshell of the week. They obviously their general manager posted this little riddle that no one really managed to solve, and it did catch me by surprise. I was thinking, wait, is it April Fools? Like, what's going on? Are we going? Because no one's done this. Like, this is what's really interesting about this. No one's gone from a full Korean roster to a mixed roster. So, like, starting there, do you think? What do you think about the move? Like going from full Korean to a mix?
I feel like if if there was a Korean team to do it, it would have to be Toronto. Um, I mean, I just first off starting with like the managerial perspective, like they're a Western team, but in like a league that's about to be geolocated, right? So I'm sure they want like to connect with fans in some way. But also, this team had a lot of Koreans that speak English. Um, I think Aid, Envy has been in mixed teams before. Neko been in mixed teams before. Um, I'm sure there are others that I'm forgetting. Roki I've spoken to, and he speaks okay English. They have an English speaking coach, or two English speaking coaches rather, English speaking GM. Like it won't be necessarily if you're looking at teams that this could happen to. Like I think Toronto's the best case, and they clearly needed to make changes. I'll be honest, I haven't seen too much contenders, so I don't know Gods and Shurik's level. I think both were obviously like pretty good players and contenders, but I just don't know um, the level they were at just from I guess negligence.
Mm.
But like they obviously I feel like they did need a new main tank, and maybe Gods is just there as a backup. Maybe NB's having issues again. I don't know. So it seems like it doesn't seem like the right move to me, but it seems like if there's a team that had to make this move, then Toronto is the best team to do it on.
Yeah, I completely agree. Like at all points, it's something I referenced in my tweet yesterday as well. Like you have to understand that almost all of these guys, all of their Korean players, with the exception of Yakbung and a couple other guys, have played in mixed rosters or are bilingual. So it does make sense. Like this team can potentially transition to a mix in the short term because you don't have a lot of time to prepare ahead of stage 3. But you mentioned that you did feel like they had to replace these, or at least you felt like they had to upgrade at main tank. You haven't been impressed by Yakung's performance this season?
No, like I feel bad saying that, but no, I feel like he's been a little off, like a little scared. I feel like overall the team cohesion has just gotten worse without Stellar, but I do feel like Yakbang was one of their main issues during this.
Hmm. Yeah, I mean, from the outside looking in as well, if you're bringing in two Western players and you're going for a mix, it does almost feel like these guys are coming in to be starters. It doesn't feel like you're bringing in just Sharik as a replacement and then he's going to play with 5 Koreans. To me, it feels like, okay, these guys are coming in to start, especially since they kind of had them in their academy team. Which is what you referenced. Maybe Envy's having issues as well. We saw all the stuff that happened with Valiant. Obviously, only talking about what was public in terms of him having trouble kind of coexisting with his teammates, all the culture clashes, all that stuff. Obviously now he's in a full Korean team, so you would imagine, well, maybe there aren't that many culture clashes. But to me, like, it feels like both of them are coming in as starters, and I don't know if you feel the same way, but if you do, what do you think about Toronto? I guess heading into stage 3 with Gods and Sharik as their front line.
So yeah, I do agree. I feel like if you bring in two Western players to a Korean team, like you're not just bringing them in when this league costs so much money, right? You're not just bringing them in and having them sit on the bench for no real reason. I feel like Sharik definitely going to be a starter, and I feel like my assumption with Gods is just that maybe we saw that article about Envy and his emotional struggles, I guess, where he went through a lot as a child, and now he like talks about how he has like a few problems with his emotions. Like maybe something like that is happening. I guess probably best not to speculate too much on that, but it does feel like if you're bringing in Gauze, you're bringing him in as a starter. So in terms of Toronto as like a stage 3 team, I feel like they're going to struggle definitely a lot with having like a very new team culture, especially after they made changes just last stage and struggled with those, right? So maybe I think this is a bit of like a long-term thing. Maybe stage 4 we'll see improvements, or maybe they'll just need to pick up one more player or something like that. But you can definitely field a roster that speaks mostly English, or that can communicate in English, and I think do okay. The problem is I just feel like this team isn't necessarily like they don't look like a mid-table team to me. And I guess part of that is like I feel like let's put it this way, right? I think Envy and Neko are their two best players, and if you're bringing in somebody to start over Envy, then you're just kind of downgrading in one position, right? So that's just kind of where my hesitation comes in. I'm not sure how this will play out, and maybe Gods will surprise me. He's always been kind of a good player. I just haven't really paid attention to contenders that much, but yeah, I just kind of have I'm just a bit hesitant to say they'll improve from this.
Yeah. I mean, it's like all the points are fair. I think the biggest thing is what you say. You don't feel like they're a mid-table team, and it's really easy if you just look at the standings to say, well, they're 7-7. They're 2 wins behind the 6th seed, which is what guarantees you like that. That's what you're shooting for. That's what guarantees you end of season playoffs if you want to avoid playing in the gauntlet. And it's really easy to fool yourself. But if you look at the eye test and their stage 2, and even in stage 1, I think I remember looking at it. I think they managed to beat one other playoff team
So
to get to the
playoffs. I think the way it was they didn't beat a single team that was ranked above 14th place in stage 1.
I do believe they beat Atlanta. Maybe I remember looking at the standings and I saw that okay, they beat one other team that made those stage playoffs, and everyone else was below them. And they finished 5-2, and you'd go, oh, Toronto's really good. And then you see them in kind of in the stage 1 playoffs, and then how they kind of fell off in stage 2, and you go, well, we need to make changes. And I think the best time to make changes, if you're making changes midseason, is during the midseason break, because we saw even with the Mayhem, with a lot of the other teams, with the Valiant, like they were hesitant to pull the trigger between stage 1 and stage 2, and as soon as you get to that midseason break, you have a little more room to breathe. That's when you make the big moves, and I do like the proactiveness with that Toronto is doing. And I think we have to consider as well, like, yeah, they have the pieces to go full Korean, but you might have to consider they might not really have had an option to stay full Korean and bring in replacements for the roles that they found replacements for, because of how long visas take, right?
Oh yeah, that's also a good point. Like gods will be available immediately.
And
I have no idea how hard that'll be for Sharik.
Well, I believe he was on their academy team, so I would assume that he already has a visa from playing on the roster. So
yeah, you're probably right.
Yeah, like I would suppose that they planned this move ahead of time. They got him a visa and they planned to move him up. But yeah, like visas are a huge thing, and that's why I think like even a team like Paris, it's hard for them to pick up new players unless they're acquiring them through a trade, or they're getting they're getting someone from any contenders who already has a visa, because like pulling talent from Europe right now, like you're not going to get someone until stage 4, maybe mid stage 4. So it is a bit of a tough situation. So I think that's an interesting thing to think about as well. Like, yeah, they had the players to make this work, but also you kind of don't have a choice. You kind of have to pick up Western players or someone with a visa.
Sorry to backtrack a little bit, but I just realized that Sharik was housed in, if he had a visa, it was a Canadian visa actually. So I don't know. Hopefully they started that like pretty far ahead of time, but he actually might not be available.
Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah, well, I guess we'll see what happens with them, but yeah, visas do take. They took a lot shorter last year. They do take a lot longer this year. I know mine took like over 2 months, and I know it was like that for a lot of some of our players, not all of them. So yeah, let's hope that we get to see that new roster, because I do agree that maybe like these moves don't make me think, oh, Toronto's going to be a playoff contender. They're going to make that push to a top 6 seed, but maybe they solve some internal issues. Maybe they can stay in the middle of the pack. Maybe can make it into the gauntlet and kind of peak towards the playoffs if they can kind of rebuild their culture. So I think that's going to be very interesting to see.
And I do think they're a team that can probably shoot for like the 10 to 12 range, and then sneak in through playoffs if they keep.
Yeah, because I think the way they were playing in stage 2, they would 100% have dropped out of that range. I don't think they were. Yeah. I don't think they were on the level of a Boston, of like these teams that are hanging out in that area. I don't think they were kind of up to par. So yeah, I guess we'll see what happens with that. But speaking of, like they were able to make this move by moving up 2 academy players. So I think it's a good kind of segue into all the academy news, because there's been a lot of it. I guess we can start with Paris, obviously getting relegated. What did you think about that? Like them having the season with the roster that they had. Again, you probably don't have much time to follow contenders, but what's your kind of what do you feel like?
Let me pull up the roster really quickly. I'll give like some short thoughts on that, because I definitely wouldn't say I'm an expert on EU contenders, but I do remember when I saw the roster, I kind of was a bit surprised. I'm gonna pull it up really.
I think they had Zeal. I think they brought in Hardest, I think, for the stretch run to try and kind of salvage them, save them from relegation.
I don't know. It's not a roster that really inspires too much confidence in me.
Yeah.
I definitely think that there are like a lot of hidden talents in Europe that just haven't really gotten a chance to shine. But Eternal Academy didn't necessarily seem like the best team they could have made. That's just my opinion. I know a lot of teams have actually, like you mentioned, they got relegated, and then all of a sudden they're not even fielding a team potentially. I think NRG did the same. Well, NRG made playoffs and then left. Mayhem also leaving. So I don't know. Contenders is just a really rough environment at the moment, I think.
Yeah, that was sort of what I wanted to kind of go into as well, because you saw Mayhem dropping their team. it sort of makes sense because they're going full Korean. They probably want to field the current contenders roster in another region to kind of foster Korean talent. You have Energy, who kind of dropped out, and it was a little weird. I mean, they moved. I think from last year's roster, they did sell or move up 4 of their players, so
Yeah.
they did have a lot of success in that regard. And then you have obviously Paris getting relegated. You have Boston, Boston Uprising Academy, who is gonna fight for their life in contenders. I think next week. I think that's when trials are. So, and I think that's the interesting discussion is because Vancouver is obviously one of the 7 out of 20 teams that is not either not fielding a contenders roster or is sort of inactive in that field, like Mayhem are choosing to be inactive right now. What do you think about like sort of pluses and minuses in terms of like pros and cons in terms of having a contenders roster? Do you think Vancouver will have one in the future? What's your take on that?
So I guess strictly speaking, I don't know. I have no idea what Vancouver plans to do with Academy, if they plan to get in or not. Honestly, I'm just not sure.
Mm-hmm.
But I would say that for a team like us, there's probably a lot less value in having an academy team where you'd strictly be having one to sell players, right? Because I don't think it's very unlikely you're going to be promoting Vancouver Academy players to, the team that we have right now in its current state. Maybe maybe in a year or 2 years or whatever down the line that'll change, but it just doesn't feel like you'd be promoting academy players to our team. So I feel like that's probably why we don't have an academy team at the moment. But so the other thing I would say is that Mayhem Academy is a team that performed really well, and they still got dropped, right? So I just feel like there's such a problem right now in the scene where if you have a good player who definitely is OWL level, but has a buyout attached to him, and then a player of similar but maybe lower quality who doesn't have any buyout, like costs $50,000 less or whatever it is, a lot of teams will actually take the choice to go with the no buyout player, and so I feel like teams are just struggling to sell players at the moment, and that's kind of why you're seeing this unfortunate like shift where teams are instead of like having more teams with academy teams, they're just leaving. Um, there's a chance that changes next year where I think all Overwatch League teams get a free spot in academy if they want one. But at the moment, it's just kind of a bad situation. I don't have really any solutions. Um, and yeah, I'll add I don't know anything about Vancouver's plans with academy.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, it is tricky to figure out what is the value of an academy team because inevitably, unless you're selling players and you're having a ton of success with that, you're basically bleeding money in terms of like what you're putting out, right? And then you're also assuming the risk of, well, we're going to invest into this, and there's also relegations, which I think for franchise owners in a league like this, like it's not a very attractive asset to have, right? We foster these talents. They drop out of open division, and we have to shed out more money for a new spot, rebuild that roster. Like there's so much funding that goes into that. And if you look in Paris's case, them getting relegated and dropping out, if you think about from their perspective, well, we just invested. I don't know how much they invested, but obviously we invested some money into players over here to run this academy team, and our main team is doing pretty poorly. Could we not have used? Yeah, could we not have used these funds to bolster our roster, try and salvage it during the midseason break?
And I think that's 100% what happened to both Paris and Mayhem, rather. Yeah, Paris and Mayhem. So those are teams that need kind of to focus more on their main team, and I think that kind of letting go of their contenders teams is just kind of a, how do you say it, it just happened because they didn't have the resources available to provide for both, and you're obviously going to provide for the Overwatch League team first before you provide for the Academy team. So it's just a really sad situation, I feel like, especially for Mayhem Academy. I guess Paris, it's kind of hard to say just because they didn't perform well enough for, I guess, the org standards. So it was probably kind of inevitable. Yeah, I don't know. It's just really hard to kind of give anything like. I really want to say something positive about the situation, but it just just sucks.
Well, I mean, if we look at the positives, like what you can actually accomplish with an academy team, I think if you look at Mayhem, they obviously acquired Fate, and I think that move would not have been possible had Mayhem not had a very successful academy team and had
That's true.
recruited good talents. That move is only possible because they have Shax, because they have Fact Fiction, and those are players that Valiant, presumably moving into an all Western roster, at least like majority Western roster, want. Like those are the attractive assets. You look at Western main tanks, like there really aren't any. There are a couple in the league, but it's very difficult to get them. You don't know if like the teams want to move them. There's Muma, there's obviously Trill moving up now, but there's really not that many. So in a positive note, like that is how you get value. You move them up to your team and try and salvage your season through that, or it enables you to make other moves because you have more assets. I hate to talk about players as assets, but really like that's what it becomes, right? And it felt like after that trade, I suppose they didn't value those assets anymore, and then he kind of dropped them, which is very sad. I was very close with the Mayhem Academy guys. I kind of helped scout and build that roster, so it was it was very very difficult to see the guys perform so well and then get dropped. You understand if you perform poorly and you're out, but yeah, it's kind of a shitty situation for those guys. But yeah, like in terms of getting, like I'm not sure. Are you aware of what the rules are in terms of can Vancouver have a contender spot in Korea?
I believe it would have to be an NA contender spot.
Okay, because yeah,
just from I don't actually remember from reading the rules, but I do remember a discussion where it became apparent that like Seoul had a pretty big advantage just from being the only team that could have a contenders team in Korea, right? So I think that's how it works, but I'm
yeah, and I think that's also another thing that kind of, because there's so many Koreans in the league, that's what also forces some teams to opt out because of the rules that Blizzard or like Overwatch League has imposed on contenders in terms of the player limit, in terms of you have to have three, at least half of the team of the starters has to be from your region, which immediately XL2 goes like, well, we're not really moving anyone up. We kind of want to bring in more Koreans, but now we can't do that. So they drop everyone. They bring in 3 Koreans who are clearly guys they feel like, well, maybe these are guys we can move up. Like especially a guy like Yaki, I think is exceptionally talented. That's a guy who either is going to move up to NYXL, I think, or going to get sold to one of the other like full Korean teams.
So XL2 definitely feels like one of the situations where they're bringing in like 1 or 2 players who they plan to 100% move up the next season, and then the rest of the players are just like either kind of to appease New York locals or like to just sell to other teams, because I feel like it's very clear what their intentions are.
Yeah. But you sort of get put in a tricky spot as an organization. It's like, well, how do we get value out of this if we can't maximize and you maximize value? Well, okay, we want to field a roster that's going to be competitive. We're going to be able to move up and sell, and we're going to be able to field a roster with players who we could potentially move up, like players who do speak the same language, And when you impose, I guess, a rule set that doesn't allow for that, I think it kind of ends up hurting everyone in a way.
Yeah, I mean, for sure. It's just so many factors that contribute to how hard it is, I feel like, in contenders. But like teams have a lot of restraints and a lot of expenses. Players have a lot of, players could just be off their team the next day, like Mayhem or NRG or whatever it is. It's just overall, I feel like everybody kind of is in a poor situation just from everything that goes into it.
Yeah. Do you think that, because sort of looking forward into next season, and it's possible to know how everything's going to look. I think it's going to be a logistical nightmare to make everything work. I'm very curious to see how everything's figured out with the travel, with home and away games. I think it's going to be really, really hard. But do you think that's potentially where teams go, well, now we have another reason to get an academy team, because now we're not only talking about selling these players and looking at them as assets, but we need a consistent practice partner. Maybe all these good practice partners have flown out to China for a road trip while we're hosting some home games. Like we need consistent practice, right?
So without knowing the format, I guess, yeah, that could definitely be something. There could definitely be something to that. Like I feel like a lot of teams are making a big deal about how much ping will affect practice, even though kind of Overwatch was like that beforehand, right?
Mm-hmm.
Uh, One thing I will note that though is that like for I feel like it's gonna be very important for London Spitfire and Paris Eternal just because they're the only two European teams, and if they're gonna be housed in their region, who are they gonna scrim? Just it probably has to be their academy teams or their um, or each other, right?
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, it should be more important for some teams, but I don't think it's going to be important necessarily for like Shock Gladiators, Valiant, where they could just scream each other all the time, or you know, uh, teams in I don't know what are the other. My geography is off today, so I can't remember the other teams that are close together. But that's kind of my point. Obviously, all the Chinese teams and Seoul will be close together, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, if it's like a road show format, where half the teams are just gone, then maybe it will be important. Yeah.
Yeah. No, I do definitely get that. In terms of ping being made a big issue, like you say, it was very common back in the day with everyone playing in a high ping. And I think when everyone came to LA, we were all just kind of spoiled. We're like, okay, we need to practice in the facility so we get this. We can practice on the LAN client, and this sort of going to season two. Everyone's like, wait, why did we go into these tiny rooms with no windows every single day? Just when we can go on OPR and play on 5 ping, like the
The
difference
best
is,
part,
yeah,
the best part is that everybody was at the end of the season. It felt like everybody wasn't even using the LAN client for practice anymore. So
yeah,
it was, I don't know. Yeah, I feel like it's a bit overvalued, and people will make do with what they have. It's
yeah.
just that people got a little bit spoiled from all being in LA at the same time.
Yeah. Speaking a little bit about geolocation, because you mentioned you were in Vancouver. What did you think about the city? Is that like a city where? Because I think that's also an underrated thing that we have to think about now. Oh, do I want to join this team or stay with this team? Do I want to live in this city? And the same thing for player recruitment. Oh, do I want to live in the city? What are the taxes like? Then now we're all of a sudden entering sort of an era where there's a lot more things that go into consideration, both when signing staff, when players. So, what do you think about Vancouver? And what do you think about like? Do you think that's actually going to matter?
Um, I think we definitely enjoyed Vancouver. It's like one of those cities where everything you can like walk to everything. Or at least that's how it felt when we were there. I don't really have too much experience with it. Um, I think that one of the things though is that every team is going to miss LA a lot. Uh, like there's so much stuff to do in LA, and then there's Koreatown for all the Korean players that want to go out. And then I think one of the underrated things that people might forget is that when you're living in LA, you can also go visit players from other teams and stuff like that all the time, and hang out with like friends. But suddenly next year, that's probably gonna not be the case. You're probably only gonna see your friends twice a year unless they do the roadshow format, I guess. In which case, then maybe you'll just be in the same city as a lot of people for half the year or whatever it is. But yeah, it's just gonna be so different. I think that will affect some players' signings, but I also feel like esports is different from traditional sports, right? Where traditional sports players want to sign in what do you call it, like big market
Yeah.
cities. Whereas in esports, I feel like players would be more willing to just kind of sign to whichever team they think would be the best fit. That's just mostly how I feel, though. I'm not sure if that's actually true.
Yeah. I mean, it's definitely going to be interesting to see because there's so many unknowns heading into. It felt like season two was kind of a known quantity. We knew how everything's going to work out. Everyone's kind of a seasoned veteran, and now heading into year three is just going to be like, well,
Yeah, nobody knows now.
now everyone has to relearn how the league works. And I think it's going to be that's I guess when like really good managers are going to be super valuable. It's something that we touched on
Yeah.
on tactical crouch as well. Like that's where real managers are going to make their money. So I guess before we go into some closing thoughts, I guess we can just touch because we touched on Toronto. We can also just talk really quickly about other teams that made moves to try and kind of catch up. Obviously, we mentioned the Fate moves. So, what do you think about Mayhem's moves in terms of acquiring Fate and yeah?
So I know a lot of their rumored moves as well, or not rumored, but I'm pretty confident I know what they're doing.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, Mayhem's in such a weird situation right now. Like I want to see them on stage first before I comment. Honestly, like Byram and Fate definitely are both good players, and honestly, I think Byram's really good, and I know he struggled a bit in contenders, but we actually trialed him a lot over last season for NRG. I think they're both really good pickups, but I'm just not sure that it feels like Fate is a player that really wants to be in an environment he enjoys, and he struggles when you know those things aren't taken away from him. So like, let's say for example, he obviously was close to Moon, close to Envy. When both of those players were gone, like he looked really bad on Valiant throughout this season, honestly. So I think he's a player that has like a really high ceiling, but he needs to be in a comfortable environment, and I don't know if Mayhem's going to provide that for him. Um, like this team should definitely be better than they were, but I don't know if they'll be able to get the most out of the pieces that they have. That's just how I feel, to be honest.
So I'm trying to look at, and I agree. I think Fate. Everyone kind of brushes over Fate, and I think he does have. We have to remember, like he was a starter on the South Korean team over Fisher, over Gesture, over a lot of really good players, and the roster was picked by a very respected coach in Pavane. So Fate's ceiling is incredibly high. I do think he has the potential. Again, like you said, when he's happy, when things are right around him, I think he has. He certainly has the potential to be a top 5 main. I don't even think he was that bad. Like statistically, I don't think he was terrible. Even with Valiant, that was struggling. Yeah,
he just wasn't like one of the best as he was all of last year as he was in World Cup. So I think Mayhem just needs to work hard on providing like all the resources they can to keep these players happy, because I know that, and maybe you'll know more about this, but it does just feel like the Mayhem environment is a bit more gloomy. Like they've lost all their matches in stage 2, or I think bottom of the league right now. I think that now is like a really critical time for them. They need to make sure that everything's working together really well before stage 3, and then they're also, I think, making more moves if these pan out, and if they can keep the players happy, they'll definitely improve a lot, and they might even be a pretty good team. But I just want to see it before I stake my flag in the Mayhem camp.
Yeah. No, I think Fate can provide a boost, but yeah, I agree. It's gonna be it's tough to kind of bounce back from that hole. I guess moving on to the other side of the trade, where Fate actually came from in the Valiant. What do you think about sort of their roster and their rebuild heading into stage 2 with Fact and Shax and McGravy heading the other way?
Yeah, I don't really have too much faith in this move, to be honest. Like, I think honestly, Fact might perform better than a gloomy Fate, but this roster doesn't look as talented to me as other rosters do, to be honest. I don't think Valiant will. I don't even know if they'll improve from this, because they actually started to improve during stage 2. I think they're 3 and 4 maybe, 2 and 5 maybe. But they they started out 0 and 7 obviously. But I don't know. McGravy doesn't fix any holes. Space was was one of their best players at least. Maybe Shax is good at hit scan. Maybe he'll be able to provide something. But obviously now's not a time for hit scan. We'll probably be seeing goats again, right? I don't know for sure, but I assume that's the case. So I don't know. Just to me, this team doesn't look like it improved at all, and I want to believe in them because I actually like all of these players, but I don't know if I like all of them together on the same rosters. Is just my feeling.
Yeah, it does feel weird because I do know a lot of the guys, and I have a lot of respect for them, and I think they're very good players. But I kind of agree because it is difficult to climb out of a hole. I don't feel like these moves are the types of moves that kind of Gladiators made last year when we were bringing in Fisher. He's saving our season. He's 100%. He's getting us from bottom 4 to top 4 almost single-handedly. So I don't get a feeling, especially because I do hold Fate in such high regard. I think you are losing a little bit of kind of carry potential. Maybe not as much in a Reinhardt like 3-3 meta, but I think his Winston is still one of the best, if not the best in the league, especially in sort of a 2-2 meta. Maybe not necessarily in 3-3, but yeah, and I do respect Shax a lot, but like you say, your carry potential is kind of limited, and you're still kind of bound by your teamwork. Like you're only gonna do as well as you can you have to work together in a goats meta, and you have to trust each other. And maybe that was the issue. Maybe they didn't have trust, and maybe they can rebuild that. But yeah, I guess we'll see what happens. They like I said, they were making a little bit of progress towards the end of the years, and the end of the stage 2. So,
But this might honestly, this could either help them or it could be a reset on that progress, right? So I guess remains to be seen. But just I feel like my general feeling is they're not. This isn't what needs to be done to turn.
No. So I think those are the teams that made the big moves. But do you think there were other teams that should have made moves that maybe didn't, or maybe they will, but haven't officially announced? Like teams that could potentially, with a move here or there, kind of, either go into title contention or go from kind of bottom tier to middle of the pack, where they can potentially get into the gauntlet.
I want Houston to make moves because I think that roster is salvageable. The problem is obviously there's all the drama about their parent company and whether they even have money to do that. But it just feels like they're so understaffed and they have they have holes in their roster that just a little bit of attention could fix. And it just feels like, unfortunately, like Flame is in a position where he can't really give them that attention that they need. So it's an unfortunate situation. The team, I feel like it does have potential to be better than it is. I feel really bad because, especially because Dante's a player I was really close to on Shock, and I still talk to him a lot. And it just feels like they're in a position where they could be doing so much better, and unfortunately, they're not provided the resources for that.
Yeah, I think Houston is a tricky case because everyone obviously wanted them to make a lot more moves during the offseason, but I think if you look at the roster, I mean that's still a roster that only just missed out on playoffs last year. And if we follow the same thought process of familiarity and consistency in your roster, weighs a lot. You see Gladiators, they only brought in essentially 2 players and kept the same core, and then they're much better now. So I do understand that we do have sort of a functioning thing here. Let's keep it going. Let's try and plug our holes a little bit. And I do think that bringing in Dante did plug a lot of their holes in terms of the hero pools in the DPS department. But I do think that they just don't quite have enough in this meta. I think this meta is very difficult for them. And I do think that maybe another player here or there could potentially salvage that situation. But yeah, it is super tough to have that sail of the team looming over you and you can't really make moves. And you as a player also know that, well, we're kind of stuck in this, and as a coach is stuck, and everyone, like, we're stuck in the situation where let's make moves, let's try something so that there's something to attach hope to, that maybe this will make us better. Maybe this little move, now I have something to attach hope to, and maybe we can get somewhere. But when you are down in the dumps, like, and I know how it feels, it's very difficult to climb out of that. When you don't have anything to kind of attach your hope, just like, well, we're stuck with this season, with this roster for the rest of the season. Let's just see what happens. It's difficult for everyone to bounce back, I think, mentally. Yeah, I think we've covered most of the teams, and
I'd say the last one is probably Chengdu's finally getting Jichirin. I think that's how you pronounce it. So maybe they won't be as one-dimensional is the only thing I'd say.
Maybe they'll be normal.
Yeah, no. Well, they could be normal with the ability to change into a crazy team if they want to, right? So that's how I perceive that. But maybe it'll just stay the same. I have no idea.
Yeah, it's weird as well because you're bringing in another main tank, but he's like, you also build so much synergy now for 2 stages. And Chengdu is like, obviously they're doing their thing. They're not going to win the league with this style in this meta, but they're really annoying to play against. They're really a pain to prepare for, right? So. Yeah,
it feels like Shanghai's kind of just one up them recently. So yeah, unfortunately, but I feel like they have potential, but it's just it's not clicking.
Yeah, I do think also Shanghai has a little bit more talent. I think their players, like, they're really good at playing towards their strengths, and they are pretty annoying. But I still think you kind of have to play goats in this meta to win, at least to beat the top teams. So I guess a good spot to end this would be. With the World Cup being announced, or like the, I guess the endorsements opening up last week, you are one of the guys. Obviously, I didn't throw my hat in the ring for Sweden. I'm sitting out and watching from afar this year. But you did throw your hat in the ring for coaching for Team USA, and when I see these things like from afar now, when I'm not involved, I feel like it does feel a little bit like a presidential election in a way. It's like we will make USA great again. This time we're shooting for gold. We have the talent. Like it's just all these, like you're speaking to the patriotic side of the people trying to get votes. It does feel like a presidential election, but your message was very clear. Like, I like winning. Vote for me right
Yeah.
here. So I'm just curious. What made you apply? What do you think you bring to the table? Obviously, the competition is stacked for USA in all departments, not just coaching and everywhere. Everywhere, like your country has so much talent across the board. So, what are your thoughts about the World Cup?
So I mainly threw my hat in the ring because I feel like it's a um, an environment where I can finally like put together everything I've learned and coach that way. Like as we were talking about earlier, I worked under Krusty and Pajon before, so I kind of see how different styles work, how you can cater them to different teams, et cetera, right? And yeah, I mean, I just mainly want to win for that reason, so I can prove that what I've learned is definitely what will win.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I mean, I guess the other thing to note is that USA is always a team that has, I feel like, the potential to win the World Cup. For whatever reason, they just fall short very early on. But like, I don't know. I think there are a lot of good coaches that applied. There's obviously Deep from Gladiators, Arrow, who won last year, and then maybe somebody that people won't know as much, but Junkbuck is a really good coach from Shock. Um, so I mean, I'm sure they'll will be in good hands regardless. But I don't know. I want to see it through and finally break that first round and actually, be competitive for the finals.
Yeah, because that's funny. Because both years there was a lot of hype, and first year you guys lost, or like first year, like 2 years ago, you guys lost to Korea in the first round. It's like, well, whatever, that was probably
Yeah,
going to be the eventual final. You guys gave them the best run for their money, whatever. Like, you're fine buying out like that, but obviously going out against UK was a bit of a shock. And what do you think about USA's chances in general? Like, if you're being realistic, because I do feel like I didn't really feel like you guys had that great of a chance last year. I think you guys had a little bit of a shot to take maps, but I don't think they could have beaten that Korean roster that was so stacked. But I do feel like this year, especially with the development of the likes of Super and Sinatra, they're 1 year older. They're like obviously ready to carry a franchise to a title. I think like this is probably the year where you guys can make the push.
and this is a year where you can bring like you're saying, those are the two players carrying a franchise that's currently top two in Overwatch League, just won the last stage. So I think USA definitely has potential to win, and even if Korea fields Titans or New York Excelsior or whatever it is, like you can definitely put together a team that maybe won't have the synergy of those two teams, but it'll be competitive. It'll have individual skill, and it'll be able to, you can definitely call it a title shot, a chance for a title shot, I guess.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, I think if you just look at the caliber of USA players in Overwatch League, definitely there are a lot of good teams you can make out of it.
Hmm. So what you're saying is it's pretty likely that we go into the World Cup finals and we see round five of Shock versus Vancouver.
It- I think that'd be a very funny situation, especially if uh, I guess let's say there are a lot of coaching combinations you can make, especially because Pajon and Krusty are both running for Korea. Me and Junkbuck both running for USA. Like, you could have a very funny situation.
Yeah, that would be pretty funny. Um, and that's also another thing that I see that most coaches now who are running, they're also as part of their pitch, they're saying we're going to build a coaching staff this year. And I don't know if a lot of teams did that last year. I wouldn't think so. Like with Sweden, I was working pretty much on my own with everything. Um, I don't know if other teams actually got help from the outside or if it was just everyone working on their own. But it seems like teams are more willing to build and kind of get help from the outside and really push together. I don't know if you know anything about that, and if you do, please do share. And also, if you didn't make it, would you be willing to kind of jump on a coaching staff as well and be part of that project, or you're only interested in kind of leading it?
No, I'd be happy to help, regardless of result. Um, I don't know how it was last year. I think that most teams either had just the head coach
Mhm.
or, like I know Pavane brought on Agape from London. I think that Jane brought on Renan Thera. I believe actually he worked together with him. So
Yeah, that's right. That's right. Yeah, I remember that.
So I think that it was mainly just one or two coaches. Honestly, I don't know if you need to have a full, a full blown staff, but I definitely think that working together, combining two people, is a good way to go about it. So, we'll see if I do win, then it's something I'll think about for sure. I have people in mind that I'd ask definitely for help, and if somebody that did win asked me for help, I'd be happy to lean in. So, that's about it.
Well, I wish you the best of luck in that, and you heard it, Americans. If you like winning, vote Harsha. The message was very, very clear in the tweet. Yeah, I think this wraps it up pretty well. Before we check out, where can the people find you? Anything you want to plug? All that good stuff.
I think everybody can just find me. I think it's just GG Harsha everywhere, probably. I haven't promoted my own socials in a lot because I haven't done any YouTube content or anything like that. So yeah, you can just keep up there. And thanks for having me on. I enjoyed it.
No, awesome. Yeah, it was fun. It was a new experience, but there's no better guest to have than someone who has kind of dabbled in all the fields across Overwatch. So I really enjoyed the conversation, and yeah, thanks for agreeing to come on. And beyond that, everyone, thanks for watching. First episode of Tempo Shift. We'll be back with episode 2 at some point. We'll see how that goes, but yeah, that's it. See you later, guys.
Yeah, follow and subscribe to this Twitch channel.
Exactly. Can't forget that. See, this is why I brought this guy on, because he knows these things that I forget. He remembers. He knows what's important. Exactly. Subscribe. Follow me on Twitter. You will actually see everything on the outro screen. So just follow the links there. All right, thanks for watching, everyone.